Hello, Richard here, and today I've got a Visual Studio video for you, and we're going to be looking at a really handy little debugging technique that basically allows you to dump any object to JSON in the debugger. So let's say you're working on a piece of code and you've got some complex object hierarchies going on, and you want to have a look at the state of the data in that object. This basically lets you dump the state out to a text file, which makes it a lot easier to see what's going on sometimes. Now let me just show you what I mean. So here we've got a bit of a sample application. This is in .NET 6. It could be in .NET Framework, .NET Core, whatever. And all we've got here is we've got an object called orders, and we're loading that from a repository. Don't worry about that. All this is just a bit of dummy code that populates this object with some data. I'll show you the structure of the data. It basically, we've got an order object, which represents, say, an order in an e-commerce system, something like that. It's all made up, so don't worry about the actual specifics of this. That doesn't really matter. But we've got an order which has an ID, a description, and a date, and it contains a list of order details, a collection of order details. And the order details have an ID, an order ID, a description, and a quantity. So like I say, don't worry about what this actually means. Just know that it's there to store data that we can play around with and have a look at. What we do here is our repository just returns a list of orders. So basically what we've got here is a collection of things, and each thing can contain other things. We get a hierarchy of data, so that's what I want to show you here. Okay, so let's just run this up and I can show you what the data looks like. So we've got a breakpoint on console read line, and if I hover over orders, you can see the orders object now contains some data, and there are 11 objects within that, 11 orders within that. And we can drill into the order, see the date, the description, the ID. We can drill into the order details, which is a collection of 3 things in this instance. And we can come in here and we can see all this stuff, but this is quite fiddly. Things close when you hover off them, and you can't really look at all the data in one go with this. So there are times when you just really want to get this in a much more kind of browsable format. So what you could do is you could add this to, say, a watch. You could take this object, drag it down to a watch window, and if you can't see the watch window, just go up to debug windows, and then you can add watch windows like that. This is Visual Studio 2022. It may look a little bit different in other ones, but all the sort of Visual Studios where you're going to be coding .NET are going to have a watch window in the debugger. So you can do that, and then you can expand the orders, and here you've got a more sort of stable view, if you like. It's sort of more static, so you can more sedately expand things and flick through them and stuff, and that's useful as well. Something else you can do, which isn't all that useful, is you can also hover over the orders and click on view, and this will pop up this IEnumerable visualizer, which is not really very useful, is it? It might be for certain things, but for this scenario it doesn't really tell us anything much. So I just thought I'd show you that so you know. But this is not bad. This is quite useful, but again, everything's sort of still very much sort of all collapsed, and you've got to drill into things. And the minute you step onto another line of code, or you let the code run, this is lost, and you can't get a snapshot of this data. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically dump this out into a text file, which we can then view in Notepad++ or whatever text editor you like to use. And that's really quite easy to do. So let me just show you how we can then extract this view effectively into Notepad++, and then we can sort of play around from there. So what we're going to do is, let's just stop this. First of all, I'm going to show you how to do this in .NET 6, and this technique will work with .NET Core 3 and upwards, because we're going to be using the system.text.json built-in library. So .NET Core 3 and above has sort of built-in JSON capabilities, which is really nice. Prior to that, if you're using .NET Framework, .NET Core 1 or 2, you can use something like Newtonsoft JSON libraries, but we'll come to that in a minute. We'll come to that in a moment. So let's look at how we would do this with the native code. So what we'll do, we'll have a go at this, and this will fail, and I'll explain why in a moment, but we'll go through it. So what we want to do is we want to use the JSON libraries. So we'll add in some code using system.text.json. So we want to include that assembly, and then what we want to do is we'll run our code, and in our watch window we're going to put in JSON serializer.serialize brackets orders, and this is the JSON serializer is built into system.text.json, And the serialize method will take an object and it'll basically convert it into JSON, which is a handy text format. So we'll add that watch in, click off the line and back on, and you can see we got a problem. The name JSON serializer does not exist in the current context. And you can click on refresh all you like and it won't fix it. This is basically where you need a little trick to make this work. Even though we've included, or we're using system.text.json, and that library or that assembly is, it's there, it's accessible, it's part of the sort of system, the framework system, as it were. The watch window can't see it, and the reason is because we haven't actually loaded that assembly. With .NET, just using an assembly isn't enough to actually load it into sort of the memory space of the application. The assembly is only really loaded when it's used, so you would need a line of code that uses that library, and we're going to add that. We'll add a line into our code that makes this load up. So let's just look at doing that. So what we need to do is we can force that library to load. So let's just stop that, and what we can do is we can add in a line appdomain.currentDomain.load, and then the name of our assembly. So this is basically saying load this assembly. And we could put it doesn't matter where we put it. Let me put it before all of our code, so it's just at the top here. And we'll run things again. And now you can see when we hit console.readline, we get a warning of this expression causes side effects and will not be evaluated. Well, okay, let's click refresh. And now you can see we've actually got a JSON string. So we've basically converted our object, the data representation of our object, into a text JSON string, which we can copy and paste into other things. So let's see how we can use that. If we right click on here now and we do copy value, then we can hop over to, say, Notepad++ or whatever you want to use, paste the JSON in here, and then there's a couple of little things we want to do here to make this a little bit more readable, because at the moment it's just like a wall of data. First of all, we need to get rid of the quotes. So delete the quotes at the beginning and the end, because this is a .NET string, so it's going to have the quotes. And also note that all the quote marks within the JSON are escaped with a backslash, which we don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do Control A to select all, then Control H, and I'm going to say find backslash and replace with nothing. And we'll do replace all, and this strips out all the backslashes. And then what we're going to do is we just go up to our plugins, and I've got a JSON Viewer plugin installed. If you don't have that in Notepad++, you can go to Plugins Admin and you can install it from there. And the one I'm using is JSON Viewer 2.0.5, and that's by Kapil Ratnani and Rajendra Singh. And there's a link there which you can pause the video and you can get that if you need to. So I've installed that plugin, and we just go Plugins, JSON Viewer, Format JSON, and there you go. We've got our object from Visual Studio in a nice JSON format, and we can just browse through all that data, and we can more easily see what's going on. So if you've got a complex object like this, or even one more complex, you can very easily just scroll through it and you can see what's going on. The great thing as well is, bear in mind that this is now a snapshot. So this is like a snapshot of our data at that point in time. So if we have one of those sort of bugs we're trying to track down where the object is in a certain state, and then you step over a line of code and the state changes, and you want to sort of compare the two, this is brilliant for that, because you can basically snapshot the whole object state, snapshot it into a text file, and then you can paste it into Notepad++, step over the next line, and then you can snapshot it again and you can compare the two. Now, there's an even better way of doing this. We'll get back to the sort of how this works in a moment, but to take a slight detour and show you another really useful thing you can do with this. Let's say we've got this text file, which was the state at one point in time, and we'll create another copy of this. And so imagine this next one here. This is one that basically I've stepped over a line of code, something's changed in the data, I don't know what. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm just going to change a value. So let's maybe change description to 20B, and we'll change quantity down here to say 25. And we've got these two sort of object states recorded. Now I'm going to use another application, which is WinMerge. And WinMerge is a free utility, very useful if you're a programmer. And it lets you basically compare two text files line by line, and it will tell you what the differences are. And this is a free application. Here's the About page. Click on the link, you can go to winmerge.org and you can download this for free. So I really recommend you do that if you're not familiar with it and you don't have it. And what we can do here is we can create new documents, and this gives us a left side and a right side that we want to compare. So we'll go back to Notepad++, and we'll take our first snapshot of our data, Control A, Control C to copy it, and we'll paste that into the left-hand side of WinMerge. And then we'll go to our second snapshot after we hit our imaginary breakpoint. Copy that back over to WinMerge, paste that into the right-hand side, and then you hit the compare button or refresh. And you can see that this has basically picked up the differences in the data. So we could have these two very complex data hierarchies. And using this technique, we can take a snapshot of the data, and you can see that in the left-hand side, we had detail 20, and in the right-hand side, in the later snapshot, we had 20B, and it's even put the B in sort of pink to show us that that's the difference. Then on the left, you can see this overview here, and we can see we have quantity 2, quantity 25. So very useful way of just snapshotting complex data structures in Visual Studio, pulling them out into Notepad++ or whatever you like, format them into JSON, and then bring them into WinMerge to compare the two and instantly see what's changed in the data. So can be a really useful debugging tool. Let's hop back to Visual Studio for a moment. This works, as I said, for .NET Core 3 and above, so .NET Core 3, .NET 5, .NET 6, because they have system.text.json libraries built in. Prior to that, you'd need to use Newtonsoft or any other third-party JSON library. I'll show you that in a moment. But before that, let's just talk a little bit about what we're doing here. Now, when we're debugging, we don't really want to be changing the source code. We don't really want to be doing this here. Putting in extra code to make things work. Now, if your code already references these libraries, you don't need to specifically load the assembly. It'll be already loaded. If it doesn't, and you get the error we saw earlier, then you need to add this line. But as I say, you don't really want to modify your production code with debugging code if you can help it. So if it's up to you, if you don't mind having this in, this won't hurt anything necessarily. So if you don't mind that, go for it. But what you could do as well is you could put in a compiler directive. So you could put in a #if debug #endif, and that way when you're debugging, it'll build this line of code in, and when you're on your release build, it won't. So that's a more elegant way of doing it if you were concerned about such things. So what we'll do now is I'll show you the same thing again, exactly the same thing, but I'll show you how you would do it with say Newtonsoft JSON libraries. So let's get set up for that. All right, so now let's say we were using .NET Framework or .NET Core 1 or .NET Core 2. What we would do there is load up the Newtonsoft JSON library. So go over to your project, right click on your project and do manage NuGet packages. And you would search for Newtonsoft. And there you've got Newtonsoft.json, and you would install that, which I've already done. And then what we need to do is we would want to be using Newtonsoft.json. Remember, we need to tickle the assembly to make it work. So we would, this time, app domain, current domain.load in Newtonsoft.json. Make sure that assembly is loaded into the sort of memory space for the watch window. Bear in mind, like when you're watching the code, the watch window doesn't load anything up. The whole point of the watch window is just to sort of sit on top of what you're doing and probe your application without changing it. So we need to make sure the application kind of is in the right state for it to be able to pull that assembly in. So let's give that a go. Let's fire this up. And this time what we're going to be using is the Newtonsoft JSON convert.serializeObject command. So you can see that here, JSON convert.serializeObjects brackets orders. And that's basically done it straight away that I've done that. So again, same deal then, right click, copy value, Notepad++, create a new window. We'll paste that in and it should be the same deal. Delete the beginning and end quotes. And then Control A to select all, Control H to do replace backslash with nothing. And then click off that, plugins, JSON viewer, format JSON, and there we go. So that shows you how you can do the same thing using Newtonsoft JSON if you're using .NET Framework, anything prior to .NET Core 3. So, like I say, a really handy technique, not one you use every day, but, store it away in the old brain box for future reference if you ever feel the need to have to compare two kind of tricky data sets when you're debugging. And I hope you found it useful. I hope you find it useful in the future. And until next time, Thanks for watching.